Hi, you. Yes, you. Did you know you're using a centralized version of the internet? It's a world where we neither own nor control our identity, data, or finances. In this current version most of us use, Web 2, the internet is geared towards user-generated content and convenience. That content is controlled by centralized entities like email providers and search engines that have access to your personal data. Then, Web 3 was introduced. It's an effort to decentralize the internet, but a lot of its tools are still controlled by a few centralized entities and aren't very easy to use. And yet, there are good parts of both versions. So, to create a truly decentralized internet, we're combining the accessibility of Web 2 and Web 3's goal of returning control back to you. The result? Web 5. It's a new version of the internet that we're collaboratively building. Web 5 is composed of 3 pillars: decentralized identifiers, verifiable credentials, and decentralized web nodes, all of which are open web standards. Combined, they create a truly decentralized online experience that hands control of your data back to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to TBD TV and happy Friday. If this is your first time tuning in, this is a live stream where we chat with self-sovereign and identity experts about what they're doing in the ecosystem, just to learn more about those projects and to learn more about the ecosystem. So just to let people be able to get a chance to tune in, because I know people trickle in sometimes, I want to show y'all a highlight reel of what to expect in our TBD TV streams.
In the music industry, why people get overwhelmed with it is this is it. This is the music industry. If you zoom,
that's crazy.
Like this is every participant and every legal contract. And so, yes, it's really complex. But if you simplify it into a supply chain as a precursor to why SSI, why decentralized identity is so important, you have a lot of different industry identifiers. This is how you get paid, and your music, where it's used, gets tracked throughout the world.
When we were learning about Web5, it showed that there's so many possibilities regarding user safety and privacy that you can do with Web5. So which is what the main focus we wanted our app to embody.
Especially with the ride-sharing experience, in doing our research, we found we're especially concerned about protecting their payment details, their location. These are really sensitive pieces of information. We're really compelled to help people feel safe and secured in our version of a ride-sharing app.
Suppose a Brazilian banking institution wants to leverage your tools. What would the flow be like? What are the protocols used in order to implement this flow?
A couple of different ways it can work. Sometimes if it's just that direct institution, they'll integrate with us using APIs in the back end. So that institution controls the front end. They can control the wallet, they can control their traditional web app, that then calls Finclusive to do those compliance checks and issue the Finc ID for them. Finclusive can issue the wallet, but typically it's our partners are doing.
I think education is probably what the internet was built for: sharing information, sharing knowledge. Platforms like YouTube, Twitch, etc. have done a fantastic job of connecting people who know a lot of information. However, it's very hard for someone to go onto YouTube and understand that the person that they're learning from is verified, a good educator, knows what they're talking about, 20 years in the business or whatever it is.
Okay, y'all. So today's topic, we're talking about DWNs. We recently announced, I believe last week, we announced a partnership with the Decentralized Identity Foundation, which you might hear us refer to as DIF, and Google Cloud, as they're operating and hosting Web5 DWNs, and we're calling it a community node. So that's what we're going to talk about today. A couple other things before I introduce Andor. I know he's probably like, can I talk yet? But so the agenda for today, we're going to go through intros. We're going to do a beginner's introduction to DWNs. If this is your first time hearing about it, we'll do a little bit of demos. We'll open for Q&A, and hopefully we have enough time within this hour to talk about a couple more advanced topics around DWNs for people who are familiar. Also, if you notice, there's a QR code on this is my right hand. I don't know what corner that is for y'all, but because the mirror's flipped. But there is a QR code, and that should give you a couple of hints for today's quiz, which we normally do a quiz in the middle of this live stream. All right, so I want to ask you a question, Andor, before we introduce who you are and all that. And my question is, if you could compete in any Olympic sport, since the Olympics started today, which one would you choose and why?
I used to wrestle in high school. I think it's a fantastic sport. They actually almost cut it off the Olympics one year. So I would definitely do wrestling, but that's a serious sport for people that have serious time to compete in that. But if you've never watched it, it's a great athletic feat when you can compete at that level. So some pretty impressive wrestlers out there.
Yeah, I feel like you would do well because you answered it so fast. I didn't
Well, luckily they have wrestling is like one of the first sports in the Olympics. So
nice. In your mind. Yeah. I think I would do track. I'd probably lose, but if I'm gonna do anything, it's running. All right. If people in the comments have their thoughts as well, feel free. I'll say hi to everyone. Hi, Angie. Also hi to Pedro. And there's people in our Discord as well. We can't necessarily see their comments, but Tanya earlier had mentioned that she prefers Winter Olympics for the ice skating, but summer has fun stuff too. Awesome. So let's get into it. Andor. So I did a little research on you, and I noticed you have had a lot of roles, and one of them is you're the chair of the technical steering committee at DIF, or the Decentralized Identity Foundation. What does that role look like? What are your responsibilities?
Sure. So for those of you that don't know Decentralized Identity Foundation, or DIF, our role is typically within the decentralized identity ecosystem. We've incubated a number of specifications. These are the things that really drive some of the standards and so forth that become adopted later on in more what we call standard development organizations like W3C. So we've incubated a number of specs there. And so being a part of the TSC, I'm fortunate enough to be working with a number of really talented people. I co-chair along with Encore, who's Encore Barji, who's the pronouncing his last name wrong, but he's the CTO of Checked, you might also know. But a number of really talented individuals get together, and we just talk about trends in the industry as well as ways that we can improve the working groups that occur in DIF. So we all get together in an open community, these working groups, and they work on certain work items. So decentralized web nodes, which is one of the main things that we're talking about today, is a working item within a working group called secured data storage. So the point of decentralized web nodes was a solution or a proposal around how to make data storage more secure for more people. There was another effort that happened before that, and then basically there was a lot of work that went into decentralized web nodes, which is why it's taken a long time, because we wanted to get it right. And that's why it's so exciting, is partly, if you look at all the other storage solutions out there, I think decentralized web nodes are one of the longest running working groups because it's been so hard to get right, but that's why we took the time we did. You guys probably know Dan Buckner, huge. He was an original editor and author. I came in later and started helping chair the decentralized web node working group. But we just try to keep the community together and work on different pieces of tech, but at the same time foster a community of open source sort of contributions. We're not perfect, but we try our best to make that work with as many people as possible.
That was a lot of good tidbits. I didn't know it was the longest storage solution that y'all have been working on. But I think it's good that you're taking your time to make sure you get it right, like you mentioned. Before we jump into more of DWNs, I only have one more question about you. And I'm just curious, you've been in, it seems like you've been in self-sovereign identity for a few years from looking at your LinkedIn. What initially inspired you to dive into the world of SSI?
Yeah, so it's a great question. My wife's Indian. You guys might see her. She's also in this space. And we were trying to get our visa to the US. So we immigrated from India. And our visa, I don't know if anybody here has gone through the visa process to immigrate to the US, but it took us 3 years. And she couldn't even meet my family for that time. And I thought, man, this is crazy. How is it taking this long? And so I started working on my own protocols before I came into the decentralized identity space, trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And I saw all these people have been working on it for years, which was like a breath of fresh air because it was like, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. People have been working on this. And but the idea was, how do you make moving data faster across ecosystems to allow things like visas to happen quicker? It shouldn't take 3 years to process something that, and getting all that data too is like a huge pain. You have to find where you've been living for the last 15 years. Who has that information? I moved a crazy amount of times over the last 15 years. It's really hard to collect that data. So if we can make that faster, and even incrementally faster would be huge, but I think there's an opportunity to make it monumentally faster with some of the secure storage tech and better communication mechanisms. So that's what really got me into this space. And if anybody here is an immigrant, you probably resonate a lot with that mission statement, because it's a problem that impacts a lot of people.
Yes, I love that. That's like what motivated you as an immigrant myself. And I was telling you that I immigrated here. It's not as easy as people think to like move to the US and become a permanent resident and a citizen. So that's a really interesting perspective you had of like, maybe I can use technology to solve this and have this information all in one. Okay. Now, let's talk about DWNs. You kind of gave us an idea that decentralized web nodes are like a storage solution. Now, this might be a hard question, but how will you describe this to a 5-year-old?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to describe it. As a 5-year-old, I don't know if 5-year-olds are using Twitter, but I'm gonna extend that 5-year-olds are using Twitter at this point. You have your followers, and today on Twitter, they're all in Twitter's. Twitter owns your followers. And so what happens if Twitter doesn't like what you're posting? Then you lose all that information. It's basically locked with them. So how do we give you control over that data so that way, instead of Twitter owning your followers, you own your followers, and you publish maybe on Twitter. But in the end of the day, if Twitter says, I want to block your account, you still have access to your own data because it's your comments, it's the community that you built. That's a small, simple use case, but you can think about things like if you're a vendor on Amazon, right? And you've built this credit around like, I'm a established vendor. I've built a reputation over the years of selling, millions of or thousands of items and shipping them correctly. And then all of a sudden, Amazon decides has an issue with something. Some issue happens with Amazon and they cancel your account. You've lost your entire reputation of thousands of valid transactions. And that's a real material impact on some people's lives if that happens. You have to restart the account. So you should be able to move these accounts across different providers and be able to reuse that data and do it in a more secure, safe way. And that's the whole point of this is how do you move data across systems better? That's really the impetus. If you look at Visa, same problem. How do I move my data from myself to another entity in a more secure way where they can trust it? That's where a lot of these problems occur and why we need something like a DWN to exist. That's that basic sort of use case there.
Those were good analogies, I would say, at least for me. All right. So you kind of also, another thing I wanted to ask about. So you talked about earlier, like with the Decentralized Identity Foundation, there's a couple of storage solutions. DWNs was one of them, and y'all have taken a bit of time. You did mention you weren't there in the beginning, but I'm curious if you know what the conception of this idea looked like. How did y'all come up with this and decide like this is the right choice for storage solutions?
Yeah, so there's another spec at DIF called encrypted data vaults. You can take a look at it as well. That was sort of superseded or at least stopped being worked on, and eventually something called Identity Hub came out, which moved names eventually to decentralized web nodes. it's been a long journey for the people that have been putting it together. So we get together every 2 weeks and we talk about how to improve the specs, where there's some challenges, and specs aren't just about like technically what's in the spec. Of course, that's a big part of what we talk about. Sometimes it's about how do we provide better tools for the community to engage with DWNs, right? Because when we look at the whole picture, a lot of this is technical, but a lot of this is also community and adoption. And how do we get people to know about it, use them, and learn from them? There's certainly like this learning curve that has to be is still like there when you learn how to use DWNs. There's a lot of new concepts. So people constantly ask like, what is a DWN? How does it relate to the other solutions out there? And there's some really interesting, like, we're not the only position around secure storage. I personally think DWNs are the best and most mature position around like this type of decentralized app framework that exists. But there are other solutions out there that will argue that their solutions are the best. So how do you, in an ecosystem of other secure data solutions, propose out to the community that, hey, our solution is actually the solution that you should be using for these reasons? And we went to, there's a conference that happens twice a year called the Internet Identity Workshop. And it was great because we got a whole bunch of secure storage solutions together. And we said, let's talk about each of our solutions. Why should we use you, basically? We said, let's build basically a spreadsheet. It was on like a whiteboard. And we said, let's work together on saying, like, here's what we do really well, and here's why we were focusing on the things we were. So DWNs focus a lot on the common use case. There are certain use cases that are like not where DWNs are like particularly exceptional at, but for a majority of use cases, if you look at 80% of the apps, that's where DWNs are really trying to make an impact on, not the maybe even 90%. Like there's 10% of apps where it says it's basically out of scope. You need something very specific for your use case. So we really try to get good for those 90% of sort of apps that exist on the market.
It sounds like a little bit of DevRel-ish type of work. Like it's like the technical part, but then like you're talking about like the community, making it make sense to people without like forcing it down their throats and figuring out how can we improve this so it actually is something that people want to use. I love that. All right, so
one quick thing here is that one of the things I first did when I came on a few years ago to help with the DWN working groups was we put together a guide. I can share the link actually in the comments. But this was a start. It was just here's what exists in the market. Okay.
If you share it in the private chat, I can share it in the regular.
So here's what exists in the market. Here's what DWNs do. How do you even pronounce DWNs? Because everybody says it a little bit differently. So actually one of the biggest questions was, how do you pronounce it? I've heard DONs, DWNs, DWeb nodes. So that's, we try to answer those questions, and they're very basic for some, but they're good questions. And those are the challenges we see when we talk to about DWNs in the ecosystem. I think most people agree that something like a DWN needs to exist. And you'll hear it in different terms, secure storage, vaults, but something like that needs to exist where it's essentially encrypting your data on your devices with your keys so nobody else can ever look at them, and doing it in a way where you feel like you actually own your data and you can interoperate across other devices and other systems. Like that's something that I think you'll see general acknowledgement around the problem statement. The solution is where people sometimes disagree, but the problem statement is something that everybody really aligns with.
Yeah, I agree with it. Like, can't keep my data to myself and decide who can see it. All right, so actually too, right? So what happened is, like, at least from my understanding, DIF created the spec, and then TBD kind of implemented it with like a programming framework called Web5, and then we're continuing to like develop on the technology. We have our own servers, but now, like I mentioned earlier, DIF is operating some community nodes or a community node, and then Google Cloud is hosting it. I'm curious, like, what is the benefit of that from your perspective? For like, how is that beneficial for the community? How is it beneficial for TBD? Why would Google Cloud even want to get involved with this?
It's a great question. And one of the feedback we got from We Are Developers, as well as a number of other events we've had in the community, is why is Google even a part of this? So first of all, you can run your own DWN servers on your own. You don't need Google. You don't need anybody to do that. You can just run it on your own service. I think there's tons of links out there on the GitHub repo to allow you to just self-host it. But for a lot of people, they don't want to host up their own infrastructure, which is why you have hosted services that will allow you to do it. Like, for example, host your storage, give you networking. The big deal with Google being a part of this is that it's traditionally a centralized service provider offering out decentralized services, and they won't ever be able to see your data. It's all encrypted with your own keys, right? But it's enabling you to use one of the most stable sort of companies out there for something like your data hosting. So it's essentially, imagine a way more a private drive for yourself where it's really encrypted with your own keys and they have no idea, but at the same time, hosted in an infrastructure that you can trust from the perspective of uptime and from the perspective of networking. Like, that's a big deal. And honestly, getting the name recognition of having three major players, DIF being the neutral foundation, TBD being the main implementers of the spec, and Google being one of the largest companies in the world. It's really cool to see these organizations getting together and backing a more secure future. So I think that's on a messaging level, it's really powerful to see these companies get together to try to provide a resource for people to go and build their own Web5 apps. Right? So that's why it's such a big deal. It was a long time in the works for those that were in the back end. We were working a long time, and it was mostly on TBD side, and then DIF eventually came in and sort of helped out. But it was a lot of energy that was spent to make this happen, this partnership happen. So it's really a kudos to the entire team. Kim Hamlin, definitely on the DIF side, was facilitating a lot of conversations across three parties. And then the whole TBD team was also doing that. So it's really cool to see that happen.
Yes, I love that the way you phrased it too. On like, this isn't a normally or traditionally centralized company, big, well-known company, and very like stable, but they're like, it's kind of a good message that they're like, hey, we're embracing this. All right, so in a second, we will switch over to your demo section, but hopefully folks have scanned the QR code to see a couple of the hints for today's quiz, because that's what's coming up next. And then after that, we'll jump into our demo so you can see how DWNs work and how something called protocols work as well. So let's get the quiz started. All right, I hope that quiz was fun for y'all. I'm going to switch the background so we can do the demo. And Andrew, you sent me a link to share with people. What is this link? It's the
so there's two links I'm going to share. So the first link is just, I'm going to give you a quick overview about how DWNs kind of work a little bit more practically. And then we'll actually run through a very simple 101 demo that's going to be the DWN connecting to Google. It's going to show you a very simple record. It's hosted by DIF, that repo. So we'll be able to show that as well. And then I think at the end, right, there'll be some questions. So people, if they have any specific questions about things or want to learn more, I'm happy to answer. So first of all, maybe we can share this screen first. So this is just quickly, I want to introduce people to this concept around protocols because they're a really big part about DWNs. It's probably one of the more powerful parts about it and also why DWNs are special. And the idea behind protocols is how do we encode and share these rules around how people interact with your own data. So I have my data and I want to be able to describe how people interface with that data. And most of the times you have this giant overlay on top of your app that basically allows you to like set these giant, tiered permissions and so forth. But the authentication is actually built into the messages themselves in DWNs, and all this is described, this whole system is described over a simple JSON document. So one of the challenges I mentioned at the beginning is how do we allow people to onboard easier? And one of the ways is to give people access to more protocols. And eventually I could see a marketplace where there's all these different protocols and people align on certain ones for certain things. But you can see here, for example, credential issuance is a question people often have, which is like, how do I issue a credential over DWN? You could use something like, if you're familiar with the identity space, you could build some traditional issuance flow, like use an OpenID for verified credential issuance, or you can actually directly write it through something like this. So what happens is on the DWN side, you install a protocol. You set basically what types of schemas exist, as well as the structure of who can interact with which data, and that's how it works.
I just got a comment. If you could, I thought it was zoomed in good enough, but they said, can you zoom in just a smidge more? Sorry.
Yeah, I can zoom in. Okay.
There we go. Good.
Can you see now?
I hope they can. It looks good to me. It looks good.
So this is an example, and I've been just putting together over time, collating different protocols that I've seen around. These are all in the dev namespace, because eventually none of these are official protocols, as in, there are people that are working on them. There might be some issues with some of them, but the point is that we're getting a space to go and just look at protocols together. This is the most minimal version, right? You have one of the first protocols, which was called Yeeter protocol, which was a simple, you post a response to somebody, and that was kind of the initial one of the first protocols. But the idea here is eventually we have a way to, for people to go and look and see, oh, this is the most common protocols for these applications. So we have more convergence around protocols in a marketplace of some sort for DWNs. And then, just so you know, you can actually go and install forks of your own protocol. So for example, if you wanted to modify, I can take an example. Let's say social media, right? If you wanted to modify your protocol to be able to, for example, change who can reply to certain threads in for example, a social media app, right? You'd be able to actually go and just make the modifications on your protocol, install on your DWNs, and that encodes your personal private DWN, which might have slightly separate rule sets. So one of the big things we've been talking about in the community is, how do we version this? How do we make sure that we're versioning it correctly? How do we keep semantic structures as time moves on? Those are things that we've been trying to figure out, what's the proper way to do this over a DWN. So that's been like one of the community efforts here. Does anybody have any questions on this or comments, thoughts?
I do see a comment. It's not necessarily on the protocols. So I'll just reiterate to everyone. Let me check if the Discord as well. But I'll just reiterate to everyone, like, protocols, what Andor was saying, just as a repetition, is protocols allow you to have permissions to or access to certain data. It also sets up the data schema and the data types for your protocols or your data inside your DWN. And then also it seems like you're trying to create kind of a marketplace for protocols, so that way there's a shared language and people can copy it, or they can slightly edit it if they want. I did see a comment here. It's pretty long, and I can probably sum up what they're saying. They essentially said they agree with this, and they think there's beneficial sides from financial, healthcare, and all that. And in addition to machine learning, but they seem to be questioning if this is actually going to be beneficial to big tech, because they can't earn money with advertising anymore. And then they said, much love to the Web5 developers.
It's a really good question. I think there will be people that adapt to not having. I've seen a number of efforts of trying to figure out how to flip how the value model is for certain big companies. Like, how do you do advertisements where you're not able to actually see all the data, or you're not able to track people's data, right? And it's definitely a paradigm shift. For some people, it will be challenging to adapt, but I think this is one of the biggest areas is how do you create incentive models where now there's new markets that come out because there's this whole new way to interface with people. People themselves, their data is valuable. In theory, you could sell your data, right? Because that's now you control it. So you have the optionality to share your data with whom you want, and there's a marketplace for that. So, this is something that is a really good question because it ultimately hits to, how does this get adopted, right? If there's no financial incentives, then it won't have adoption. But we're seeing different players out in the market trying to figure out ways. There's a few different apps out there that are trying to give you like very personal private AIs. And their whole pitch is like, we can't see your data. So that's like different ways that people are trying to make this work in the marketplace.
Yeah, that reminds me of an app called Kin AI. They use DWN, and basically, I think their future idea right now, it's in beta mode, is like you would pay to be able to use the app. So that's how they would get money. I'll let you keep going. And usually the questions come in a little bit later because one, there's a bit of a lag, and then two, people may think later.
And I think that's really good point. But I was thinking about Kin, by the way. They're a great team, and they're also working with Web5, and they're trying to give you a very private, personal AI. But one of the things they have to be very careful of is how do you do this in a way where they never see the data? That's why DWNs come in place, and how DWNs fit into their whole business model. So this is something. If you guys go to this link here, if you could share it out. This is for the community to be able to launch their own DWNs with Google. It tells you how to do it. It's basically Kim was actually the one that wrote this up, but it's a demo. We can run through it today. But it allows you to quickly use a CLI tool to just store a record into a DWN in Google, and you'll be able to play with it there. It's a 101. So it'd be helpful for those that want to get started. But there are other apps out there if you want to start to get more advanced that will teach you a little bit more. I think there's some really good tutorials on the TBD website. For example, this how do you build a to-do list, right? That's going to probably be the next step. And then as you move on farther, you can get into some of the more advanced applications. But I think right here, actually, you can see here, this is essentially all that's required to use the Google's community DWN instance. So if you want to use Google's DWN instance, great. You can use this DWN endpoint. If you want to use your own private instance, you can just go to the DWN server URL and then actually just host it, launch it on your own. And if you want to use TBD's instance, you'll launch it on, you'll just provide the default arguments. And it's the difference between the TBD community node and the Google DW node is that TBD's community node will most likely be moving a little bit more, whereas Google's will be staying more stable. So it's not going to be moving as much. It's going to be pinned to a certain version for longer. So you can rely on it a little bit more than you can on the ones that are moving more. So I'll just show you quickly the demo, and we'll just run through this so you guys can see what this looks like for yourself. I'm going to share my screen here.
Cool. And then even though I had said zoom in earlier, maybe zoom in just a little bit more since for the protocols demo, they said zoom in. Yeah, maybe okay. That's good.
Can you guys see? I'm going to actually just...
I could see it. Y'all tell me in the chat if you can see it.
I'm going to just start from scratch here so we can start from the beginning and play with it directly.
Okay.
So this is I'm just going to copy the exact, basically, instructions on the repo that we just shared. So you can see I'm quickly pulling up the DWN CLI sample. It's running through all this stuff. I'm going to just quickly cd in. There we go. Oh, more yet. Yeah. And then we'll just quickly create a DID. And for those of you that don't know what DIDs are decentralized identifiers. This DID DHT is something that actually was created by it was formalized by.
It did say zoom in. Sorry, it seems so goofy, but yeah. But like for them to see as well.
Can we see?
Hopefully. I think that's good.
I'm about as big as I can get. So this is what's called DID DHT. It's a type of decentralized identifier. There's if you guys want to learn more about DID DHT, it's an awesome DID method. But for now, just know that decentralized identifiers are ways that you can securely share your identity basically without a federated or central provider. So that's the basics there. And then you'll just run the command that they offer, that's on the repo, and you'll get a record ID here. It's can you guys see that or no? It's a little hard because it's so big on my screen. So this is what the record ID. This is the identification for that particular record. So all of these records are stored in the DWN encrypted with your keys. And then when you want to list your records here, there's another command, right? So you can see here we have one record with this string. And then when you want to retrieve the record, just copy and paste. It's hard to see without, let me just small real quick.
Yeah, you can make it small.
Okay.
I feel bad.
All right, and then you're just going to copy and paste this string over. And you can see here, so we wrote a hello world to the Google DWN. And if you go to config .json, there's a source, source config. You'll see on the top here, the DWN point is dwn.gcda.xyz, and that is your Google DWN. So that's a super simple example. It's basically how do you just write to your Google DWN and get that data back. But that's a starting point. And then we're actually working on better ways to explain the story here so that it's a little bit more easy for people to understand, like, why do you need this? But you should be able to get started on your own. Just click the link on the DWN user guide. And if you have any questions, just reach out to either myself or DIF or Kim Hamilton Duffy, who's the executive director of DIF, to learn more and to learn what's going on and why, maybe if you have any questions or problems.
Love it. I think that was a great demo. And if y'all want, I'll plug myself in there. You can reach out to me. I did one contribution to that repo. But that was really good. I think if I don't see any questions as yet, but while those questions come in, I do see someone typing. While those questions come in, I will start asking you some of the questions we have, especially since we're at the 37-minute mark. So one of the questions I had for you, so we got to see some of like the more beginner features of DWN, and I was wondering if there's any advanced features or features that you were looking forward to coming out in DWNs.
One of the things that there's two areas that we're really interested in right now, or at least I am. One is around versioning. We've been talking a lot about it recently because think about it this way. You have the first version of your DWN protocol, and we're trying to think about how to manage that lifecycle as these protocols adapt and grow over time. So we're really thinking about how do you preserve semantics correctly? How do you make sure that the right protocols are being evaluated at the right times? So that's one area that's really interesting. The other area I think that's super interesting is propagation. So one of the things that DWNs are not really great with yet, they will be eventually, but it's going to take time, is really high fidelity transactions where you need to have things moving at really fast speeds. Because when you think about a network of nodes, like let's say you are on a chat thread and there's hundreds and hundreds of people on that thread, you want to be able to make that data move very quickly across the entire network. And you don't want a serial like, here, we're going to write to each of the DWNs. You want it to be like almost like a gossip network, which is like people basically sharing that data across the network almost as a relay. So I think that's an area that's going to be really exciting when we get there because it's going to open up a whole bunch of new applications. Today, there is quite a bit of applications you can go build with the current SDKs, right? Dan's built his whole follow app, which if you guys haven't seen, is really cool. I think he shared it at We Are Developers. That's kind of like basically a social app. So those don't require really high fidelity interactions, high speed interactions, the way that, for example, a messaging app might. So we're definitely interested in getting there. It's hard to get exactly right. And one other thing and question or point is that we're trying to figure out how to describe that within the protocols themselves. So that's another advanced topic, is how do you describe the propagation techniques within the protocols? So those are really exciting things that we're looking at. I think recently just got pushed in something called subscriptions, which is the topology of a DWN, actually, I'm going to share one quick thing. Is there's if you go to the spec, can you, I'm going to share my screen
share
here.
your screen? Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I'm going to share my other screen here. Okay, here. So can you guys see my screen? I'm going to zoom in.
Be able to. I think it's good.
Okay, so how does a good question for somebody getting started is like, what does the network look like? What does the communication look like between DWNs? If Alice and Bob have a DWN, how is that data actually moving, right? So typically you're actually going to have two DWNs. You're going to have your local DWN, which might be sitting on your phone, and your remote DWN, which is going to be sitting on the cloud. That's the Google version. And so you're able to basically use the remote node in cases where you need high availability. For example, if you're on the plane, you don't want people to not be able to send you messages. Your local node is often going to be used for synchronizing across your remote node and your local node. And so there's recently, for example, some work that came in around subscriptions to allow you to quickly receive data from your remote node to your local node. But for those of you that want a quick overlay on the network, basically, Bob would share, you can see in this case, Bob shares a DID or an identifier with Alice. Then Alice is going to send a message to Bob's cloud node, for example, which in this case would be Google, if you're using the Google DWN instance. So Alice sends a message to Bob's node, and then Bob is going to get his message on his phone through basically subscribing to his remote node. And so now he can go and see the message, respond to the message by sending it directly back to Alice's node, and Alice is going to receive that on her phone. So that's a basic communication flow for how messages get passed across between people.
Good example and good diagram. Just to make sure, was that the one that, were you answering this question below, or you were just saying in general? Because you said you saw a question come in.
Oh, no, I was just saying in general. And then Dan's mentioning about DID links URLs. Yeah, those actually, DID links URLs are a really cool feature about basically resolving a DID URL to HTTP sort of endpoint. I think Dan's actual app on Follow is going to be one of the really cool ways to see how that works in action. Yeah, DID links URLs are another area that I think is being expanded on. It's not officially part of the DWN spec today, but it's possibly something that gets in there pretty soon.
Yeah, I want to add more onto those. I think they're pretty cool. Like you can basically take a progressive web app and turn it into like a decentralized web app, and kind of like you were saying, it'll give you you'll fetch data from your DWN. It'll give you this HTTP URL, and you can like directly just plug it in. Like let's say you have like an image tag and you want to put it into or like have it show up as a source attribute. You can just plug that link in rather than doing like a whole query as we traditionally do. There's another question here that it's a little long. Let me see if I'll just read the whole thing because, all right, let's see. So they say, so basically we have public nodes and private nodes. Is it possible to give some company only partial access to a private node? For example, if I have a playlist at SoundCloud and want to share only one single playlist to some service like Spotify, do I have to create another private node or limit access?
No, so the whole, if you look at protocols and how they work, they allow you to define sections or blobs within your data store that you give specific access controls to. So you don't need to create another DWN. You just use the same one, you just give them separate permissions. So it's all about that protocol definition and how you describe the interactions between that entity and yourself. But you're in control. So at the end of the day, you have one DWN. You might have a few just living, but the point is that your interactions are encoded just over that one protocol definition, and you don't need to keep on spinning up. You have fine-grained access controls on that.
Do you still have that screen share of the protocol definition so they could see that area? Let me hide this.
Yeah.
Where it says like anyone can access or whatever. Yeah. So those
you can see here.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So you can see here. If you want to think about it this way, like in this case, the recipient of a message can reply, and a recipient of a message can write to a reply to your DWN, right? So you'd encode these roles. So if you want somebody to only have access, you can give them access to a particular role within the protocol definition to say, hey, these people have only access, or this entity only has access to this particular records that you've authorized. So there's a full control of authorization here.
Awesome. And we have another two questions from the same person in Discord, Pipilalia. I hope I said your name right. They said, imagine you want to build a new Web5 Twitter. This is similar to, I guess, Daniel's project that he's working on. User tweets, are these stored on their own DWN?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And yeah, I think Dan's is a great example, if you guys ever get a chance to see it, of alternative real app. All we're doing right now is doing play apps, and there's more serious apps that you can look at. But you would store on, it's all your own DWNs, but generally you'd want somebody to go onto the remote DWN, because the remote will always be live. If you do it on your local DWN, the challenge there is you're offline sometimes, right? You're in the plane, you're in the mountains. I don't know where you're going, but sometimes your phone's off because you lost battery. So you definitely want to have it stored on your remote DWN. So to the point about DRLs, it's like transform, so allow you to reach it over HTTP, and then you go into that basically follow app or whatever app you want, and it's hosted on that DWN in the remote environment. So then it's always available no matter where you're at in the world.
And then there's another question they're following up. You might have answered this. Let's see. If the data is public, like tweets are, does it make sense to store it yourself with all the cost involved with storage and the burden of distributed architecture?
Yeah, so first of all, there's an approach here architecturally that's very different than, for example, some of the other relay mechanisms out there, which is like, we're going to propagate the data across the entire network. It's stored only in the nodes that you want. Yeah, to Dan's point, you store it basically, you can sync it across your own nodes, and the Google DWN hosted is, I think, 1 gigabyte of data free. Post that, you'd have to pay for it. But if you want the free version, that's one of the things that the advantages of using the Google DWN hosted node is that they're going to give you a free gig, and there's some it's probably actually a little more than the gig, because there's some the way they compute the gig is actually less than, I think, the actual total payload. There's you get some benefits here. But essentially, as long as it's under a gig, you don't even need to pay for it. If it's over a gig, you're probably going to have to pay a little bit. But for some people, that might be worth it, because there's a ton of value in being able to have people interact with your data. And I think one of the propositions here is, as DWNs become more and more used, they become more valuable. So if you had, for example, to pay $5 to host your own private data, but that enabled you to use a whole bunch of services out in the market, because it's like your point of interaction for your Twitters, your Instagrams, your traditional messaging apps, that's really powerful. And I'd easily pay $5 to get that access. But it's just, we need to get the adoption there to be able to do that.
And then we have a comment from Daniel saying Google's DWN only attributes your 1 gigabyte when the record is over 30K. So thanks for that specification. And then
Exactly.
Mehdi said, I guess they're saying, so essentially you always have one local copy and one in the cloud. Yeah,
so it's you yes and no. You can do it. You can have as many copies as you want. One of the things that your phone is constrained on is the amount of resources it has, right? You only have so many gigs. So one of the things I think that's on the docket is selective sync, which means that maybe you only want to sync a few gigs on your local device and have the rest just stored in your cloud. You can do that. So that's things that are definitely in scope here, which is hey, I only want to sync 1 or 2 gigs. I don't want to have the whole 60, 70 gigs of data on my local phone. Great. Selective sync it. Now you have only that 1 or 2 gigs you really need to have locally, and then the rest is stored in your remote. So that's how you do that. But if you want, you can copy everything at the same time. It's up to you.
Yeah. And then I know we had a couple other questions. I'll still pay attention to the questions coming in, but I know you had a couple questions or topics you wanted to hit before the stream ended. So one of those questions was we want people to adopt DWNs, both DIF, both TDD. But we want to make sure that the implementation is easy enough or accessible enough for even someone like our grandparents to use it. How can developers, what advice do you have for developers to make sure that implementation is accessible in their applications?
I think there's two things. One is we're actually discussing today, and if you have any feedback, we'd love it at DIF, how to make this easier. So we encourage you to give feedback on here's the things we'd like to see, like here's the example or so forth that makes this easier. We're also providing at DIF a community to help build things like on top of DWNs. It's going to be called DIF Labs. It's not launched yet, but it's intended to be a community to support you if you go and you want to go and build an app and you need to reach out to experts or people that are trying to, that have information that you might benefit from. We're trying to provide a whole supporting system for you. So it's going to be really exciting because we're hoping to see a ton of applications fly through DIF Labs. So we'll keep you up to date and maybe Rizal, there's a way we can share information as if anybody's interested. But hopefully that's another way to grow this community.
Yeah, definitely. As you get updates, reach out to me and my teammates, and we'll make sure the community knows. And okay, that kind of covered the question I was going to ask you. What's DIF Labs? So, what are some like Web5 applications that you're hoping people like start building in DIF Labs or just in the future in general? Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of creativity here. I have a whole repo where I just start building random ideas. I was like, I built a fitness app for myself, and then I was looking at doing Web5 Calendly sort of copy, which would be like, why am I paying somebody to manage my meetings? I should be able to just like have an app for myself that's open source that's like sort of coordinating my meetings. Like there's almost anything that you see in the Web2 space. Like there's often some correlation. It's like, hey, I can do this for free in a DWN, and like you can provide services on top of it if you want to make money. But for me personally, just seeing things that you have to pay for being free is an awesome thing to see, because it's just like, I shouldn't have to pay for something as simple as calendar coordination. That's like a very simple feature. So I'd love to see more apps where it's just taking things that people pay for that they shouldn't be and putting it in the hands of users. So if anybody has an interest in working on stuff like that, again, we're building DIF Lab to support people that are doing things like that, partly. So it's going to be awesome to see those apps come to life.
DIF Lab sounds super exciting. I want to be involved, low key. Okay, my last question to you is, before we move into like the non-technical segment of this, which should only last like 5 minutes or less, is like, you're really passionate about Web5. I'm curious from your perspective, why do you find it so significant, and like what role does it play in the larger ecosystem? Because I remember when I first hit you up, you were like, I need to talk about how Web5 plays a large role in the ecosystem. Like, why do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think there's this concept of there are people that, let's put it this way, a lot of the communities converge around some similar concept around what the world should look like. And I think there's an aspect of freedom, a little bit of an aspect of rebelliousness. Like we like to think about how can we rethink about the system. I've worked, before this, I used to work in the Web2 space, and I did a lot of stuff in Web2. And it was actually almost the opposite of what I work on today, which was, privacy invasive to some degree. And I think when you think about what is the world you want to go build, I like seeing optionality and freedom to choose the choices that I want to choose. Like vendor lock-in is something I really hate. I hate the idea that you're forced to use certain providers because you don't have a choice to move out. And so to me, this is a way that you can express yourself in various ways. I think one of the hypotheses I have is, people will be building more and more apps as we get better with AI and we get better with all this like automated coding. People are going to go and define their own apps for themselves. Like it's just going to be a thing where I want to go build an app that's different than everybody else's because it supports how I like to see these things, right? Like I use Emacs for my code editing. A lot of people like to use VS Code, but we still use the same code underneath. But imagine the same data layer underneath where everybody can go and build their own apps, and we just have this consistent data representation. So I want to create this future where people can go and build their own apps for their own use cases, and at the same time it still works, right? And that's where DWNs really come into play, is being able to do that thing.
Love that. I think that's great, especially that combined with your initial reason for even getting into SSI makes a lot of sense. All right. So we're going to transition out of this segment. It was a great segment. I think you gave us a lot of great information, and I love the questions and interaction that came in on all of the platforms, from Discord to Twitter and everybody. So thank you for tuning in. So this segment is just like a short little game. I'm basically going to say a statement, and it's not like a statement, I believe. It's just like a lightly controversial, doesn't have anything to do with tech sometimes. And you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if you want to add more context to why you feel that way, you can. And people in the audience, I encourage you as well to, put your thumbs up or thumbs down as well. So hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. First statement is AI will eventually surpass human intelligence. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I'm going to come up with one that not a lot of people are going to like.
Okay.
But I believe people are incredibly, intelligence is hard to define. So am I allowed to talk about why I think the thing? Intelligence is very difficult to define. So it depends on what you mean by intelligence. But there's a lot of smart people working on AI right now. I came from the field of AI a little bit, and I can just tell you that don't underestimate, my personal take is don't underestimate what a lot of money and a lot of incentives will do. And right now there's a lot of incentives to get AI right for especially businesses. So I think in a world, I think the question is what type of future you want in a world where AI is monumentally smarter than it is today. And who knows how long that takes. But we need to think about the incentives right now of AI and how they interact with us.
Okay, I love that. Okay, this one is way less serious. I pour milk in cereal, or I pour milk first and then cereal. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I don't have cereal. If anybody ever, I don't have cereal. If anybody has ever had a South Indian meal, my wife's Indian, I think I mentioned, and we cook a lot of things like dosas and idlis. If anybody knows what those are, if that's awesome. If you don't, then go check it out.
I like that. That was a surprise. All right. And last question is, I'd rather be an entrepreneur than work a 9-to-5. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
For sure, thumbs up. So
yeah, because you're an entrepreneur right now, right? So
I am.
All right. Thank you so much, y'all. I feel like it was a really great session, informative. If people want to rewatch this, if you came in late or you're like, oh, I missed some stuff, these recordings are currently live on YouTube. So our channel, I believe, is TBD videos on YouTube. Go back there and you can rewatch it. Thank you again, Andor, for coming and sharing your information with us. Do you have any last things you want to share before I close out?
There's a whole community here that obviously wants to support you guys. So if you guys have any questions, you have the TB community here. You see Dan and Angie and a whole bunch of people on this chat literally giving you information. So please, we're interested in helping adoption cycles. So if you're interested in learning more, getting some help, if you're stuck on something, please reach out to people to block you. And there's tons of people that are willing to offer the support.
Awesome. That was a great way to end the stream. All right, y'all. Have a great Friday. Bye.
We announced it. TBDEX 1.0 SDK is now out.
TBDEX is an open protocol that makes moving value around the world much more efficient and streamlined. We're solving this problem with TBDEX by building a standard open source protocol that anyone can use for free and plug into.
We're super excited to have developers be able to start looking at this technology and start implementing it. We've put together a new financial protocol that we believe can fundamentally revolutionize the way that we think about transmitting value around the world.